Vanessa Beeley, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thanks for having me on, Jerm. It's good to be back on. I always enjoy talking to you anyway.
Yes, I enjoy talking to you, and every time I talk to you, you're in a different country.
Well, that's not exactly my fault, but yes, I am.
Where are you now?
Lebanon.
Okay, last time I think when I spoke to you, I think you were...
Still
you were in
Syria,
Lebanon last time, I think. And then you were in Syria before that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I spoke to you after the fall of Syria. Yes, I did, didn't I? God, I don't know. Like the months are disappearing at the moment.
How is life treating you?
It's good. As my friends here tell me, I'm the only white refugee in Lebanon, so that's a kind of badge of honor.
Speaking of refugees, have you heard about white refugees from South Africa being given refugee status by Trump in America, Vanessa?
No, I haven't. But somehow it doesn't surprise me at all. Anything that Trump does is kind of, we were talking about this morning, you know. I mean, he is comedy gold. Unfortunately, most of his comedy has very tragic consequences, as they are having now, of course.
My microphone is off. Why do you say that?
Why do I say that? Well, because, you know, in my opinion, Trump was, for example, brought in. Let me just lay the ground for this discussion, because I don't believe there's any difference between a Democrat and a Republican president. I think there's a roadmap, and I think presidents are chosen for their individual role on that roadmap in that particular section of the roadmap. And I was saying this back as far as 2016, when I said it was very clear that Hillary Clinton would not be allowed to win, because had she won, the entire resistance axis would have been very cohesive and very united against her, because she was a known war criminal and infanticidal maniac, basically. So there wouldn't have been any confusion. However, when Trump won, everybody sort of went into this free fall of, oh, we can do a deal with Trump. And that's his role, right? And he's also, I would describe him as the economic battering ram. I mean, if you look at everyone during these last elections was arguing with me blindly that, you know, but he didn't start any wars. And I come back to the point, you can't look at the actions of one particular president. You have to look at it in continuity. And what did he do? He was basically going to put the U.S. embassy in occupied Al-Quds in Palestine. He was going to gift the occupied Golan Heights since 1967 back to Israel, basically, instead of back to Syria. He assassinated the commanders Soleimani and Mohandas, the commander of the PMU, the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq. He introduced some of the most savage sanctions on Syria, the Caesar sanctions, which in my opinion were one of the main factors that led to the fall of Syria, that basically exacerbated the economic problems in Syria from 2018 onwards. And he initiated the Abraham Accords, which of course was all about normalization with so-called moderate Sunni states with Israel. That, of course, had begun with the Camp David Agreement back in 1979 between Egypt and Israel. And, of course, Egypt I perceive to be kind of the Ukraine of West Asia. It's completely in debt to Europe, the Gulf states, the U.S., the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, etc. It's no longer really a sovereign country from a governance perspective, in my opinion. And it's collaborative with Israel, both in the genocide of the Palestinians and in profiting from that genocide. And then if we look at, Biden's term, which everybody terms as the genocide term, or Bomber Biden or Bomber Joe, whatever they want to call it. But in reality, yes, Biden was heavily involved, of course, in pulling through the final solution against Palestinians, the final genocide of Palestinians and the extermination of their presence from their own land in Palestine. But actually, he was relatively reticent in handing bombs over to Netanyahu compared to Trump. And this was the argument that I was having with everyone when Trump was elected. Everyone was telling me, no, he's going to end all the wars. He never started any wars, so he's going to end them all. And of course, he was elected on the promise of ending the NATO war against Russia and Ukraine, right? And basically, after Trump had been elected, Syria fell. It fell in that period between his election and his inauguration. And again, it was very clear to me that something major was going to happen in that period. After Israel came to a ceasefire agreement, or rather, another pseudo ceasefire agreement with Hezbollah, it became very clear to me at that point, Israel would pivot towards Syria, but I didn't realize how quickly. I mean, literally before the ink had even dried on the ceasefire agreement between Hezbollah and Israel, the attack on Aleppo began. The dawn after the ceasefire agreement. And then if we look at, if we go back to, we were talking earlier about the 2009 strategic paper that was published by the Brookings Institute. I think that, for me, is the clearest example of how a roadmap works and how each individual president has a role on that roadmap. And Trump is at the final part of that roadmap, which is regime change in Iran, potential U.S. invasion, if not an invasion, which I think they would be insane to try and do, but that's still one of the options in the paper. Certainly some kind of blitzkrieg bombing campaign against the alleged nuclear facilities of Iran. Of course, again, under the pretext to prevent Iran having a nuclear bomb. I mean, this gag has been running for 30 years, but we're expected to believe it's really happening right now. So for me, Trump is hilarious at times. I'm not going to deny that. He makes me laugh. But for all the wrong reasons. I mean, it's almost like we're living in such a dystopian universe where someone like him is in control of what is hurtling towards a potential nuclear war. And I'm not talking about Iran. I'm talking about Israel.
There's a lot to unpack there. You were alluding to the Uni Party, which, of course, seems to... it gets lost, particularly on the Trump supporters, because they believe he's playing 5D chess, and we must trust the plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But of course, the whole thing is about a larger trajectory that goes back a number of decades. How far back do you think it goes, Vanessa?
If we're talking
I know that
the war against Iran.
I know that JFK wasn't particularly excited about Israel.
Well, he wasn't particularly excited about their secret nuclear program. And that, in the opinion of many, is one of the reasons that basically he was assassinated. One of the reasons. Going up against the CIA, of course, is another one. But I see the two as pretty undivisible anyway, or indivisible. It's been going on really for decades. I mean, I would say, look, Israel was created as a barrier state in the Middle East. It was created to prevent the unification of the Arab states and the access to their own resources and basically independence and true sovereignty for the states in the region of West Asia. If you look at the placing of the Zionist entity, it's bang in the middle of kind of Syria, Lebanon, Egypt. So it acts as a barrier state. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. made it very clear what Israel's role is. Of course, it's a military proxy in the region, but it also provides surveillance and interference. Very strong word there, and very true. Israel played an enormous role in the final bringing down of Syria last year. But it also provides a bulwark against any expansion from any other nation that might threaten U.S. supremacy globally. And that includes the Belt and Road Initiative from China. It includes Iranian expansionism. It includes Russian expansionism. As we've seen, Russia has pretty much, I won't say it's been driven out of Syria. I think it's negotiating like crazy, actually, with Israel to try and remain at its base on the eastern coastal area in Syria. But it's been put under pressure. Whereas that military footprint has been in Syria for the last, I think it's around 60 years now.
I've got the Which Path to Persia document in front of me. It's about 254 pages long. Funny thing is, most people don't know about it.
No.
Very quickly, what is it?
It's basically a strategy paper. I mean, the Brookings Institute was started with Rockefeller's seed funding. It has strong connections
to go wrong?
and the Ford Foundation. But, it has, it has strong links to the State Department, to the Pentagon, to the CIA. It's working on sustainable development goals. In other words, it's pushing through all of the strategy that influences government policy, just as, in a way, Chatham House does in the UK. Both of them very powerful, influencing organizations. But Brookings Institute has offices in Doha, Qatar, Beijing in China, and America. I think there's one other. India. Sorry, Delhi in India. So clearly, it's very strategically placed also. But the Which Path to Persia strategy document, which I think was updated in 2016, lays out a series of methods by which to bring about regime change in Iran or even complete destruction of Iran. And among those are the persuasion policy, which is related to the nuclear deal, which actually was initiated by President Bush back in 2005. And then, of course, run with by Obama, abandoned by Trump. But all of this is part of what they're talking about in the strategy document. So that effectively what it's about is pushing Iran into a corner where it has to accept the coercion of the US, and which of course is always going to be in favor of the security of Israel in the region, right? And so now we've seen the final chapter, which is Trump restarting the negotiations. But of course, again, changing the conditions of the negotiations mid-negotiation, right, which is what the US always does. It's what Israel always does when we watch what they did with Hamas. Just as Hamas has accepted a deal, they bring in another clause, which Hamas is never going to accept. And then they point at Hamas and say, yeah, but you're the unreasonable one. And that's exactly what they've been doing with Iran. And they're trying to make Iran look unreasonable because they have a red line of saying, no, we do have the green light to enrich our uranium. We do have a green light in our country to develop a missile program. We're not which country on the planet today is going to say, yeah, we'll just give up our missile program. We'll just throw away our air defenses and let the US come on in and steal our resources. I mean, it's completely unrealistic. But the other chapters focused on internal destabilization, which of course we saw back in 2022 with the so-called women's rights protests. And I was actually in Iran during those, or shortly after the height of those protests, traveling from city to city to actually take opinions from people within those cities. And then, of course, the weaponization of terrorist groups like Mujahideen al-Khalq, or MEK, as people know them, that are now I think, are still headquartered in Albania, but of course they're also situated in Azerbaijan, on the border with Iran, and still are a serious threat to Iran's territorial integrity to a large degree, or at least to the population. And then, of course, finally, there was this plan that if a U.S. invasion didn't work and if U.S. aggression didn't work, then they would weaponize Israel against Iran. And the U.S. would kind of go, oh, no, we have nothing to do with it. It's all Israel. While, of course, providing the weapons, providing the equipment, the intelligence, the refueling in order for Israel to be able to carry out the aggression against Iran. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now.
The brilliance of the Brookings Institution and other organizations like them is that they're just think tanks, Vanessa. They don't actually do anything. They just write down stuff and they suggest it. Have a look at this and tell us what you think. So they can never claim responsibility for anything.
No, of course not. No. Everyone works on a basis of plausible deniability from the government down, right? Like, we saw this in Syria when the West was producing all of these NGOs like the White Helmets that were effectively carrying out their work. And of course, ultimately, Al-Qaeda itself, right, was a plausible deniability project, because even though anyone that doesn't now know that the West was funding Al-Qaeda and ISIS to overthrow the Syrian government, they haven't been awake for the last 14 years. But, effectively the thing is that this isn't so different. What the Brookings Institute was laying out a strategy to bring down Iran is not really any different to what they did in former Yugoslavia, what they did in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, and so on. It's just on a much bigger scale, right? And if you remember General Wesley Clark, when he was talking about the 7 countries, his statement was to finish off with Iran. So, because Iran ultimately is perceived by the West and by Israel and by the Israeli alliance, so the Arab Gulf states, as being the head of the resistance axis. And actually, there's an interview with Jolani in Arabic back in 2015. And you have to remember that Jolani, who's now the unelected president of Syria, Al-Qaeda junta in Syria, and is now known as Ahmed al-Sharaa because he changed his name to avoid the 10 million bounty on his head. That's how I see it anyway. Just as they changed the names of all the terrorist groups to avoid, persecution for the crimes they committed against humanity in the region. But in 2015, he basically said, look, the plan is we'll cut the hands of the resistance. That's exactly what has been happening since October the 7th. And then eventually we'll go after Iran. And he was talking about the fact that he could basically deploy hundreds of thousands, in his opinion, of takfiris, both inside and outside Iran, to lead a destabilization campaign against Iran. So this also can't be written out, because Jolani is channeling the strategy of his handlers. And his handlers, of course, as we know from recent events, are the MI6, the CIA, the MIT, the intelligence agencies in Turkey, but definitely led by the MI6 from a sheer intelligence perspective.
The resistance. Who is the resistance, and what are they resisting?
What are they resisting? The resistance has grown effectively out of the oppression of the Zionist regime. So from Palestine to Lebanon, to Syria, to Iraq. Iraq, even the government in Iraq still doesn't recognize the state of Israel, which might be surprising to some because, of course, it's been heavily colonized by the United States that has established its military bases on Iraqi territory from 2000 onwards. Yemen, of course, Yemen is an entire state resistance against the Zionist crimes in the region, and Iran. And then, of course, you do have countries outside of that axis, if you like, which include Venezuela, Cuba, I'm going blank on some of the other countries, but there are countries, even Serbia, Algeria, for example, that are pretty steadfast, Tunisia, in supporting the Palestinian cause. And Hezbollah was actually created after Israel invaded Lebanon in the 80s. Hezbollah was created in response to that. In Syria, of course, it's a more complex relationship because Syria, to a large degree, took in a lot of the Palestinian refugees. And again, unknown to many, they were given full residency and full citizen rights, but they weren't given citizenship because Syria believed that they should have the right to return. So they didn't want to jeopardize that potential for them to be able to return to Palestine. And Syria also harbored many of the early Hezbollah groups that were being formed to oppose Israeli occupation of territory in pretty much all of the region. Iraq, the same. You have, again, people describe them as Iranian proxies, like Kataib Hezbollah, for example, like the PMF, the Popular Mobilization Forces, or sometimes known as the PMU also. But they've been pretty much integrated into the Iraqi military. And even in 2017, I met with Commander Mohandes in a press delegation. And as he pointed out, and the same goes for Hezbollah, it's not only an Islamic resistance. There are Christians, there are Muslims from other denominations within the group itself. So it's very misleading, first of all, to say it's Iranian proxy. It's an ally of Iran. And to say that it's a Shia Islamic movement. It isn't. And in Yemen, the same. I would not even say that they're followers of the same branch of Islam as Iran. They're very different. And in Yemen, you have the Shafi and the Zaydi, which are equivalent to the Sunni and the Shia, fighting side by side to prevent the genocide in Palestine.
But you didn't tell me what it is that they are resisting.
They're resisting Zionism and imperialism. I mean, colonialism and Zionism, yes. I'm not sure what else they should resist. I mean, that is the cancer in the region. You know, no country in the region is safe while Zionism, both as a movement and as a regime in occupied Palestine, exists.
It sounds like you're speaking in code. Is another way of saying what you're saying the following: they are resisting the state of Israel or the existence of Israel.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue whether it's a state or not. It's an occupying force, which is settling on Palestinian land.
So Israel doesn't have a right to exist.
It has the state of Israel, in my opinion, does not have a right to exist. It was superimposed on Palestinian territory by the British and effectively by the UN in the end, which partitioned Palestine, yes, post-Balfour Treaty 1917, right? I mean, who gifts a country to a people without a country? You know, and if we get into the Zionist movement itself, I mean, when it began in the late 1880s, it was described by the majority of Jews as being another anti-Semitic cult. But the important point to make here is that it's not only about Israel, it's about the entire Zionist movement. And the Zionist movement, which effectively pushed through the occupation of Palestine by the Zionist movement, is also effectively capturing U.S. government, UK government. You only have to look at the 2030 roadmap, I keep banging this drum, between Israel and the UK to understand to what extent the Israel is embedded now in every single sector of society in the UK and in the US. And they're managing those societies. Unit 8200, which is the spy unit of the Israeli security services, which has just been bombed multiple times by Iran. is responsible not only for operations in the region, but even further afield. Right. I don't know if you remember the story about the Pegasus spyware that was put onto the phones of journalists. That's Unit 8200. Many of, for example, in the UK, Oracle, which is storing data from the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Health, government sectors, and so on, originated with Unit 8200 and in Israel. So that's the extent to which they are now part of the surveillance systems that are taking over our world today and capturing our world today and capturing populations today. So in a sense, how I see it, it's a global resistance which is being represented by the resistance axis here, but people are not making that connection. They're reducing the argument down to it being the region against Israel or being against the existence of Israel. And nobody is against the existence of Jews. Pre-1917, Jews, Muslims, Christians coexisted perfectly peacefully in all of the region, including Palestine. In Syria, there was a large Jewish population until they were basically encouraged to go and settle in Palestine.
And of course, then by extension, you have the Greater Israel Project.
Yeah. I mean, the Greater Israel project is, again, I would probably focus more on the clean break doctrine, which was written up effectively by members of the CIA and intelligence institutions and agencies in the US, commissioned by Netanyahu back then. Of course, he's been pretty much in a position of power for at least 30 years, since, in fact, the whole nuclear development in Iran gag began. So that gives an indication also of his role in what's going on. But the clean break doctrine effectively talks about having to take out Iraq and install US military bases to threaten Syria and the rest of the region, including Iran, and to partition the rest of the region into smaller states that can be controlled by Israel more easily. And of course, we're seeing that now in Syria, which is in effect being broken up into unrecognized partitions, but nevertheless, that's the direction in which it's traveling right now. And to maintain a sort of strategic chaos in surrounding countries, but also to ensure that all of these countries do not have the military capability, this is very important, now or in the future, far into the future, to threaten Israel's security in the region. And that, of course, is one of the reasons that Israel, while I was still in Damascus, was bombing every single military installation in Syria, including naval, air force, air defense, military bases, development centers, and so on, because Syria was responsible, really, for the manufacture and supply of weapons to the resistance in Lebanon and Palestine for many years, actually. I mean, Iran also, but Syria was one of the main support units for the resistance there. And so, yeah, Greater Israel, which is expanding rapidly now with the fall of Syria, of course, Israel almost immediately expanded into southern Syria. And the plan is to create what they call the David's Corridor up the eastern border of Syria, extending into Iraq and as far as the Euphrates, which of course brings them also very close to the border with Iran in the future.
I've got the Brookings Path to Persia doc in front of me, as I said earlier. And chapter 5 is titled Leave It to Bibi, Allowing or Encouraging an Israeli Military Strike. And it's about the US supporting or even, as they say, permitting Israel to conduct a military strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. And this was written in 2009.
Yep. Exactly. I mean, it's insane, right? And the thing is, because we were talking about this on UK Column on Wednesday, and as you said, most people are unaware of this, even in the region here. And I think this is what these think tanks do. They put out these strategy papers, as you said, plausible deniability, etc., for the government. Oh yeah, but we didn't write all this. And on the basis that most people are not going to read it or investigate it or follow up on it. Just as the John Hopkins stuff before COVID, there's multiple instances of this. I mean, you have to have a lot of patience to trawl through even all the WikiLeaks documents, for example, which also give a lot of insight into upcoming US policy in the region, right? Yeah, and of course, what has Trump done? He's and leading up to what's happening now, of course, you had Trump falling out with Bibi. Yeah, right. And everyone falls for this.
Theater.
Yeah, it's pure theater. And I always say this, people, we have to focus on the direction of travel, the main road, not keep taking these side roads that they create for us to be distracted by or diverted by, And everyone was kind of taking the hopium at that point and kind of like, oh yeah, Trump's going to fall out with Bibi and that's it. And that's the end of Netanyahu. Even if it's the end of Netanyahu, it's not the end of the project. And this is another thing, people instill all of this evil into one person. They do it reverse as well, because Assad was carrying out all the crimes against his people in his country, right? So was Gaddafi, so was Saddam Hussein. And that's how they criminalize and demonize a target nation by Hitlerizing the leader. But of course, it happens also the other way around. Like if the US wants deniable plausibility from what Israel is doing, it points the finger at Netanyahu. But knowing full well they're going to support him in what he's doing, right? I mean, Trump was supplying laser-guided missiles prior to the attack on Iran, essentially for this attack. So this whole negotiation drama, the whole falling out with Bibi, this was all buying time, in my opinion, for the US to supply Israel with what it needed and also to move their own hardware into position. One of the reasons that they left Yemen, apart from the fact it was going to bankrupt them.
The overwhelming Christian support for the attack on Israel, on Iran, and the overwhelming blind patriotic support for Israel when they aren't even Israeli citizens or aren't even Jews, is a very strange occurrence, and it's tens of millions of Christian Americans, particularly, and I know there are many in the UK also. In fact, right across the West.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Christian Zionists, which is a complete oxymoron anyway, outnumber Jewish Zionists. I can't remember the exact number, but it's a big difference, right? It's a big gap between the two. And that was another thing with the Trump administration. I mean, it's packed full of Christian Zionists. And of course, they believe, I call them the Armageddonistas, because they believe in the necessity of an Armageddon to bring about the second coming of Christ.
Yeah,
and that is where all of and that's where all the idea about Al-Quds and the closing down of the temple and so on, and the building of their own temple over it, etc. That all comes from that as well. And if you look at Netanyahu's language, of course, since the beginning, the war against the Amaleks, even the AI genocide programs have names like Lavender and Gospel. Do you know what I mean? It's like they're subliminally imprinting this idea into people's minds. But the reality is that real Christians in the region, apart from in Lebanon, you do have the Lebanese forces or the phalanges who actually collaborated with Israel back during the Sabra and Shatila massacre, when they were the ones that actually carried out the massacre of the Palestinians in Lebanon. So they are still kind of wedded. In a sense, they are Christian Zionists here. But the majority of the Christians support the resistance.
Yes, but it's created also a very strange sociopathic behavior in that I cannot believe how many Christians I have encountered who support just bombing, just mass bombing, wipe out Gaza. We must wipe them out because we need to protect Israel.
It is. I mean, I have recommended it before. There is a film called Israelism, which I think came out last year, which demonstrates how hatred is programmed into particularly Israeli kids, but Zionist kids worldwide, from kindergarten upwards. So through the education system, they are literally brainwashed into dehumanizing Palestinians or believing all Palestinians are terrorists, etc., etc. But it's a complete dehumanization program, which then entitles them to exterminate, the people whose land it originally was. I mean, it's extraordinary. And it's very hard to, it's very interesting now to see the refugees from Israel arriving. I saw a video today arriving in Cyprus, and there's a welcome committee basically chanting Palestinian chants at them as they get off the boat. What the Israeli government or the Zionist movement effectively is doing to Jews worldwide is stigmatizing them entirely. And it's, the entire argument of anti-Semitism. Well, whose fault is it? If you're going to carry out terrorist attacks from 1936 onwards against the British, against regional entities, what do you expect? If you're going to violate international law, if you're going to develop a secret nuclear weapons, if you have an option in your political armory that says if anyone threatens the existence of the state of Israel, you can use nuclear weapons against them. I mean, it's endless. I mean, if we get into the rape of Palestinians in prisons, the ritual abuse, the fact that Israel is a pedophile heaven, and that is being reported by Hebrew media, not by Western media or conspiracy theorists. People literally are converting to Judaism to escape prosecution in the US, and they're moving to Israel because there's no questions asked. And the pedophilia can continue. The child abuse can continue. And there's been recent articles, reports coming out, even in Israel Hayom, of ritual satanic abuse of children by the most extremist Jewish cult. So I'm not quite sure what to say because this belief in their own entitlement, in their own superiority, is something that should worry all of us. Whether you're Christian, Jewish, atheist, it's insane.
Why are the neighboring Arab countries just not doing anything?
What do you mean by neighboring?
Well, the argument
Gulf
that they just don't care about Gaza, for example.
Well, look, I don't even really consider the Arab Gulf states to be Arab. They were, most of them were formerly colonies of Britain or protectorates of Britain. The whole area was carved up again, and these smaller states were manufactured that survive on oil revenue. And so therefore they are effectively another form of proxy in the region of Western hegemony, in my opinion. I think it's Mohammed bin Salman put out a statement last year saying that he doesn't really care about Palestine, but his people do. So he has to toe the line. And of course, he's withholding on the normalization process with Israel on the basis that a state is created for Palestine. But a state on what? On what piece of rubble are you going to now create a state? Because while Gaza is being bombed into oblivion, the West Bank is being further encroached upon, and people are being ethnically cleansed from there, but it's kind of dropping below the radar a little bit because of the horrors that are happening in Gaza. None of these states are going to come to the rescue of Palestine. None of them. As I said, Egypt, which is it's over 100 million population now. And historically, it was pro-Palestine. Under President Gamal Abdel Nasser, up until Sadat, it was steadfast in its support and solidarity with Palestine. But that was destroyed post 1979. And if we come forward now, Sisi's mafias are running the border control between Egypt and Gaza, and they're extorting vast amounts of money from Palestinians that want to leave for hospital treatment. I think even at the beginning of the war, it was 5,000 per head, 2,000 for every child. And by the way, they were only given a 3-month visa, not any kind of residency or permanency or safety in Egypt. So if they're caught, they're refugees, they'll be returned back to Gaza. That's the humanity from Egypt.
But is Israel really on the back foot? I mean, it's got the full support of effectively NATO.
Yeah. I mean, what was it? Chancellor Merz said the other day that Israel is fighting Germany's war. I really can't quite figure that one out. I didn't know that Germany was at war with Iran, but anyway, you learn something every day. And, Germany's supplying weapons to Israel right now for the war against Iran, which is just extraordinary for me. Of course it's backed by NATO. But, and there is some indicator that the US is going to join the war, which of course, again, is written into the Brookings Institute policy document, that once Israel has gone in, then the US has, it has a decent pretext to be able to join the war on behalf of Israel. And we have actually been seeing in the Washington Post reports of Israel running out of interceptor missiles. It's only got 12 days left to be able to cope with the incoming Iranian missiles. Its air defense systems are burning out, which is true. There have been videos of air defense systems basically exploding under the pressure of firing missiles while Iran is bombarding them, But there are indicators, particularly from Seymour Hersh, that is a journalist who on occasion or very often channels the CIA. And he's talking about the US getting involved this weekend. There have also been high-level meetings between Trump and video meetings, conferences between Israel and the US in the last 24 hours. And again, the indicator is that they're going to try and bomb the Fordo nuclear plant. With the B-52s, because of course Israel doesn't have the B-52s that can drop the bunker buster bomb, so it needs the US to come in for that. So the US is basically now, again, promulgating the idea that Iran has nuclear weapons. Now, even the bunker buster bombs, because I've been looking into this morning, are not capable of actually going deep enough to hit the Fordo center. Because it's something like 80 meters underground. The bunker buster bombs, at best, will go to a depth of 60 meters. So we don't know. And of course, the IAEA is now saying, no, Iran never had a nuclear program, having actually started the war effectively by saying that Iran was not complying with IAEA inspections and so on, which demonstrates the extent to which the IAEA is another proxy of the US. But I think, just to come back to your point about Israel, I think if the US does enter, then the region will enter. And by the region, I'm talking about Islamic resistance. Iraq will start attacking. They've already started attacking US bases. There are factions, brigades, even in Saudi Arabia, which of course they call Hijaz because they don't agree with the Saudi kingdom. Qatif, which is a brigade in Saudi Arabia itself. The Muslim Brotherhood has put out a statement saying that they fully support Iran. So you will see, and I'm sure that the resistance factions here in Lebanon, in Palestine, in Iraq, even in Syria, because people are not aware, there were 100,000 an estimated 100,000 Syrian army soldiers that left Syria when it fell and have gathered in the neighboring countries and have been trained and equipped and are ready to go. So there's also potential in that circumstance for there to be action in Syria also against Jolani, in my opinion.
So how does this game of chess get played?
We have to wait and see. I'm not a 5D chess player, unlike Trump. So we have to. If the US goes in, then we're gonna be bracing here for some serious shit to be let loose, basically.
But I mean, His Royal Majesty Donald the Christ Trump did send out a message demanding that the whole of Iran surrenders.
Do you know how silly that is? I mean, it's just, this is my point, I mean, he is Comedy Central, but not in a very good way. I mean, look, the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, I mean, I don't know how he didn't laugh during his statement, but he said, look, telling the Iranian nation to surrender is not a rational statement. And that's the understatement of the year. I mean, it's kind of beyond irrational, but this is what Trump does.
Well, we know Trump was being very serious because he typed it all out in uppercase letters too, with lots of exclamation marks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I mean, it's almost like a Monty Python sketch.
Yeah.
Now, compare that to, I don't know, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. How are they viewing this whole story?
Russia has a strategic partnership with Iran that was signed finally this year. But interestingly, or maybe not interestingly, if you understand Russia's relationship with Israel, is that there's no mutual defense clause in that agreement. And Russia has been very clear that it will not come to the defense of Iran in the case of any war. And of course, the war is really only ever going to be against Israel and the US. So that is completely understandable from my perspective. However, yes, they're offering to mediate, they're offering to negotiate, and of course we've seen that. We've seen phone calls going between Putin and Trump along those lines, that Putin will step in to mediate, etc. But, I don't know. I think to some degree, I mean, the Iranian ambassador in Moscow has actually criticized Russia for not coming to their aid. Could that be a smokescreen? Possibly. It could be that Russia is back channeling weapons into Iran. China, the same. China will always keep clear of direct conflict. However, as we saw in the recent skirmish between India and Pakistan, China is supplying weapons to Pakistan, which were very successful against NATO weapons used by India. I mean, horribly successful, embarrassingly successful, really, for NATO weaponry and manufacturer, right? So Pakistan has come very strongly out in support for Iran. So is there potential, in my opinion, I'm speculating, for China to be supplying weapons to Pakistan and for Pakistan to then be helping Iran, right? So I think while we're not going to see any direct support for Iran, except through statements, which have been relatively strong. I mean, Putin sort of bashed the IAEA today or yesterday, basically saying, it was ridiculous. I mean, most people are in a state of disbelief. Like, what on earth are you doing? Of course, if they'd read the Brookings Institute paper, they would know exactly what's going on, right? But I think, China condemns what Israel is doing. However, China is extremely pragmatic. It does a huge amount of trade with Israel, does a huge amount of trade globally. And it's not going to directly get involved, as I've said. But both of them may get involved through a third party, in my opinion, anyway. And of course, what we have to remember, if Iran falls, heaven forbid, and I do think it's very unlikely, Iran is, it's a vast country. I was looking at the figures today. Palestine in total is 28,000 or 28,100 square kilometers. Iran, 1.648 million square kilometers. Right? I mean, it's vast. It's huge. The idea of the US invading this country is just completely insane for me. But of course, they will use familiar tactics, as they did in the first 8 hours, which were frankly horrible to hear and watch. with the internal operations by Mossad proxies, by Mossad operatives themselves, and the lack of air defense for about the first 6 hours was horrific. I mean, for us watching from here, it was horrible. But they recovered very quickly, actually. Sorry, I kind of lost track on the question.
What happens if Israel falls?
If Israel falls, peace comes to the region. But I think we're a long way off that happening, because Israel has the support of the US, the UK, the French, just the Germans. The Gulf states, I think, if there were any threat to Israel, would probably come into line in a sense of collaborating with whatever shape the region takes after that. But yeah, it's not going to be a fast war. This is going to be a very long, drawn-out war, in my opinion. It's not something that's going to be resolved overnight.
I mean, will it ever end? Is it actually just a forever war?
Well, it's interesting in that Brookings document. I can't remember what they call it at the end. Containment, right? Deterrence. And so first of all, deterrence, and then containment. That if everything fails, basically, what they will try to do is to contain Iran within its borders, which is kind of ironic because I'm not aware of Iran building military bases outside its borders that threaten any other country, and deter Iran from a nuclear program, which is also ironic because they haven't had any intention of having a nuclear program except for, civilian infrastructure programs using nuclear energy and so on. So it's interesting they've written that in, almost as if, if it does become untenable, they have a get-out clause where they can basically go back to, in a sense, square one until another opportunity arises. And what I was going to say, of course, if Iran falls, not only is the region itself under threat, but Russia and China. And so that's where I don't think Russia and China are going to entirely isolate Iran in this. I think they will find a way to support, but it's going to be through third parties. This is just my opinion on this.
And at no stage have we heard anything about African countries and where they stand.
Well, you're probably better placed to tell me that. I mean, I know Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore is pro.
Well, I mean, South Africa took Israel to court.
Yeah, it did. But what happened?
Well, obviously nothing.
Yeah. I mean, it was an astounding initiative by the South African lawyers. But, it takes a very, very, very strong government to stand up to Israel, because effectively you're standing up to the entire Western cartel. Right. Venezuela has done it. Maduro has been putting out some very, very strong statements. And of course, they're in the crosshairs also, have been for decades. Cuba, the same. So,
you mentioned...
Yeah, sorry.
No, sorry, go on.
No, that's it.
I was going to say, the very acutely aware will and have pointed out that the countries you mentioned, Venezuela, Cuba, etc., they all fall into the legacy communist bloc. Do you think it has anything to do with that also?
Communist or socialist?
I mean, they're kind of on the same side of the fence.
Yeah, I think, no, I prefer to look at it through the prism of what is happening in the world today is a war against what I call the little people, right? I mean, you've discussed this with multiple guests on your show. the rise of the surveillance state, the technocracy, the tyranny of pharmaceutical companies, of the ruling elite, basically, whatever you want to call them, the predator class, the billionaire club, which is another reason that I never understood why people would support Trump as much as they did, blindly. I mean, after all, he's selling the US out to Palantir, which is effectively going to turn the US into a kind of AI surveillance state overnight. So I tend to say it, if you want to, I'm not much of a political labeler, right? I tend to see it as the war to actually retain what is human within all of us, within humanity. And that, generally speaking, means the protection of and the defense of the working class, the poorer sections of society, and the educated classes, largely the middle class, which of course has been eroded in many countries deliberately, because they were the class that traditionally were informed enough to inform others, in my opinion, right? And so the resistance comes from a pushback against this, what is another branch of neocolonialism, another branch of feudal system that is being imposed on the world today, the plundering of resources and bringing it under privatized control, which of course only feeds profit into the ruling elite. So for me, as I say so many times, it's a global war. But the problem is that many people haven't connected the dots. And these arguments of, well, it's all to do with communism, it's all to do with socialism, it's all to do with capitalism, in my opinion, are just another part of the divide and rule paradigm, which keeps us either against something because we're against communism, or simply not understanding the cohesion globally of what people are actually resisting, even if they're actually not making that connection themselves. And that's where I think we as analysts and commentators have to start bringing into people's minds this idea of it being a global resistance against what is happening. It's a transnational war against us as human beings. And we've watched genocide live streamed across our phones, our laptops, for almost 2 years now. That's a complete, that's what is that destroying? I mean, certainly mentally, I feel absolutely destroyed by it. Because the sense of powerlessness and helplessness. But why do I live here? Why, when I left Syria, did I not come back to the EU or the UK? Even people in Syria were telling me, get out of the region, everything's going to go up in flames after this, right? I didn't want to leave. Why? Because people here understand what the fight is. They understand what they're fighting. And they understand what they're fighting for, which is a better world. It really is a better world. It's as simple as that. And it doesn't mean it has to be an Islamic world. It doesn't mean it has to be any kind of denomination world. It just has to be a deeper sense of our own humanity and unity as a world. And that's something, what Iran is doing is what no other country apart from Yemen has done so far. None. Country, sorry, I mean by country, I mean state. So I'm not talking about the non-state actor resistance factions, in case people get confused with that.
I saw a data point recently about how many wars Iran has created in the last few decades, and it's almost none. It's 1, 2, I don't know, 3, 4, something like that. And then next to it is the US. And it looks like vaccine stats. And I wonder sometimes if people just become oblivious to the idea that the enemy often lies within.
Yeah, definitely. Within, as in within your own country, or within, as in as an individual.
If you look at social media or just the media in general, or if you just listen to Trump, America is the savior of the world, and they are bringing democracy and peace everywhere. And the evil people are those brown people in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
or
and
the
that's
uneducated, or the undeveloped. But okay. How old is America?
The oppressors of women and all that sort of thing. And
did you see the Iranian anchor at the Iranian broadcasting? If you're talking about the oppression of women, go watch that clip. When Israel actually bombs the IRIB and she keeps broadcasting. And like 10 minutes after the bomb hit her studio, she's back broadcasting. Don't tell me about disempowered women in Iran. They're some of the strongest, scariest women I've ever dealt with, I tell you. They're awesome. I mean, same here. Anybody that knows Marwa Osman will tell you, I mean, she's a fire-breathing dragon, right? And she's amazing. I love her, but she's one of the most powerful women I know. And that's what people just don't understand. Like, hang on a minute. Western culture is talking about aborting babies full term. It's talking about assisted dying. It's talking about transgender movements that are destroying women's movements and destroying women's empowerment. Like, come on. Like, let's take a look at our own society. Why are we always so fast to point the finger at other societies and cultures that we don't understand? That's the point. I've been to Iran. I don't have to wear a veil. Even the language in Western media, like, you have to be veiled. You don't have to be veiled. You just have to put a scarf on your head. And if it falls off, no one says anything, by the way. No one gives a shit if you're walking in the markets, Sorry.
To be fair, if you look at the state of Western society now and how fat people have become, I think they should all be fully covered up.
You should do a cartoon about this. That's a perfect topic for it, actually.
Actually, that's not a bad idea. Vanessa, how can I follow you?
You can follow me most of all on Substack, of course, at UK Column. Every Wednesday I'll be on the news. And we're also doing a couple of new projects at UK Column, trying to bring in this concept of global resistance and covering the region in more depth. So Substack, UK Column, Telegram, and Twitter. YouTube is always so precarious. I don't really like telling people to go there because I'm quite sure they're going to pull it at some point.
On that note, Vanessa Beeley, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thank you so much, Tom. It was fun, as always.